John, I would like to believe in God, but I don't want to fool myself. So friends of mine who are theists tell me I have to have a religious experience to really feel it. Well, I've never had that, and I don't particularly want it. So I look to philosophy to see if that informs religion. Can philosophy, kind of a abstract academic discipline, really help us understand the realities of religion?
Yes, I think philosophy does inform religion, and even beyond that, we could say that philosophy can and should inform religion in ways that perhaps it hasn't yet done. If we think about religion not only as something that has existed in the past and exists today, but also think about how religion might exist in the future, we can think about how philosophy might have some bearing on the direction taken.
Let's talk about specific. How would it work?
Well, I would distinguish between the attitude of philosophy and the ideas of philosophy. So we can talk about those in turn. The attitude of philosophy is a desire. Might even take that further and say it's a love of understanding, a love of understanding, and for its own sake, I can remember when I was a teenager. I was still a teenager, and I knew nothing of philosophy, at least nothing explicitly. And I was standing in front of an open window and just feeling this desire to understand it. I want to understand. And I want to understand, in that case, meant I want to understand for its own sake. Not to try to beef up some preconceived idea, just to understand for its own sake, whatever that understanding might lead me into. So that's the attitude of philosophy, which I wish would penetrate religion more fully, and I think it could do. I think that religion and philosophy together on that sort of point might produce some interesting new results in the future. Religion in the future might even open us to wider horizons of understanding. And this attitude of philosophy, loving understanding for its own sake, I sometimes tell my students this is why philosophy isn't so much about logic, or it isn't first about logic, it's first about love. Philia, Sophia, love of wisdom or understanding.
It's love of what's true. Because if what's true is not what I like, I may not like it, but I love the fact that it's true. I don't want to believe a falsehood. That's foolishness. That's self-delusion. That's the worst thing that we can do. Therefore, that attitude is really important.
So if we're going to be committed to any kind of religious form of life, it should be one that's compatible with this attitude, the attitude of wanting the truth for its own sake, regardless of what it is. Maybe we'll find some happy coincidence between what results from the pursuit of the truth for its own sake and what religion, at least in the most general terms, is about. But we leave it open. We don't.
But you shouldn't predicate what you are going to believe on what you want to have happen.
Yeah,
and if it's a happy coincidence or not, I don't care. Right. I mean, I want it to be that way, but that makes me even more skeptical. Because if I want it to be that way, I want to look at the other direction. So if I have a theistic inclination, I'd rather talk to you with an atheistic framework than talk to a theist. I don't want my own views to be reconfirmed, because that's easy.
Yeah, you said that you'd like to believe in God. It could be that when we exercise that attitude and think about not just wanting the truth for its own sake, but think about some of the things that we need to be doing on that path of inquiry, like imagining new possibilities. We might even imagine new forms of religion that take us beyond God. At least God is traditionally conceived. And it may be in imagining new possibilities through that philosophical frame of mind that one finds that a form of religious life is possible, is rational.
So I think we agree that the attitude of openness and honest inquiry is really important. It's important for religion, and if you believe in traditional religion, you have to expose it to that same type of an attitude.
And it would be nice to get a form of religion that would be compatible with losing, the dogmatism that often goes with religious
beliefs. See, I don't agree with
beliefs.
that. I don't want to have any preconceived notion. I want something to be true. I don't want it to be manicured. Okay. I want it to be true. So I'm willing to go with you there. But no preconceived notion.
What was the preconceived notion that you saw in what I had said?
Well, that it may be compatible. It may have some nice harmony. I don't care.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like it to have that, but that makes me scared to do exactly that.
That's just part of the parameters of the inquiry, that you are open to some of these possibilities, but they're only possibilities.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the content, how philosophy can deal
the ideas
with the substance.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, there are three main areas in philosophy: metaphysics, which is looking at the fundamental nature of reality. Okay. The question there is, what most fundamentally exists. And secondly, you have ethics, which looks at a very different sort of basic question: how should we live? And thirdly, epistemology, which is about what we can know, how we can know, and to what extent we can know, if at all. Perhaps we should be skeptics instead. These are the kinds of questions that epistemologists think about.
Now, wouldn't the latter be a precursor to the other two? I mean, if we don't need to
certainly
analyze...
in our own time, it has often been thought of that way, that we need to get clear about how much we can know and by what methodologies we might approach knowledge and so on before we even start thinking about these big questions of metaphysics or ethics. Because because of our skepticism, we leave aside those big questions in metaphysics altogether.
Yeah, because some of my scientific friends would say that you really shouldn't waste your time with metaphysics. Physics, sure.
Yeah,
but metaphysics is a waste of time. So their epistemology says, just deal with hard science and forget these abstract notions of what exists or what doesn't exist.
Well, some of the results of that hard science might have clear implications for central and traditional questions of metaphysics, like questions about free will. And by free will here, I mean what is called libertarian free will, which is a sort of free will you can only have if determinism is false, where determinism is the claim that every event that occurs, including all of our choices and actions, all of these things are fully caused by prior states of the world. Now, science clearly has a bearing on that. And it might be that through scientific inquiry, we get more and more support for the claim that determinism is true, at least when it comes to our own behavior. So, in which case free will would be ruled out, and that would have some really important consequences for religion. So this is how some of the ideas and results in metaphysics, the example here is the example of free will, might have a clear bearing on religion, might rule out certain possibilities. You might say, well, religion so far has placed so much emphasis on this libertarian free will and responsibility. The buck stops here. I've, got all this responsibility. Religion has needed, in some forms anyway, has needed an emphasis on free will to deal with things like the problem of evil. Traditional theistic religion certainly has placed a lot of emphasis on libertarian free will. So if, through physics and metaphysics, we come to the conclusion, if there should be a consensus on this in the future, that determinism is true, and so there is no such free will, this would have important ramifications for religion.
Not good ones.
Not good ones in that case, no. Turning to ethics, there's so many different strands of inquiry in ethics. Questions about, what are the fundamental principles of right and wrong. Also, virtue ethics, which says we should be looking much more at issues about what sort of person I ought to be, as opposed to, which particular actions I ought to do. And it could be that further inquiry in ethics places an emphasis on certain virtues, which a certain form of religion might actually help us to cultivate. If that were to be the case, then there'd be, again, a kind of philosophical impact on religion, potentially.
To me, that's religion with a very small r, because that says you're using religion to give kind of a coloring, a prettiness to ethics, which is the real core.
So religion ends up being the handmaid of philosophy instead of the other way around.
Or the handmaiden of ethics, the mechanism by which we convince people to do good things, as opposed to religion being fundamental. If that's true, I don't want to call it religion. I want to call it ethics, and humanistic ethics, or whatever. And I'm happy with that. How about epistemology?
Well, in epistemology, you find, for example, arguments for skepticism. And I myself am a skeptic of a certain kind. And so I think there's a lot of hope for skeptical arguments in epistemology. And that would, of course, have consequences for religion. Because in religion you have such an emphasis, at least these days, such an emphasis on on believing certain propositions and believing them firmly. And so if your concern, guided by the attitude we were talking about earlier, the love of understanding for its own sake, is to know the truth and to believe only if you think that belief is going to get you closer to the truth, then skepticism should trouble you. And if the results in epistemology lead ever more to skepticism, that would of course have consequences for religious belief. But in epistemology, I think you also find the possibility of discovering alternatives to belief. Because in epistemology, you think about basic questions again, fundamental questions about such things as the nature of belief. And when you look closely at the nature of belief, you can sort of carve it off from a number of other alternative ways of being related positively to a proposition. It might even be, as I've argued, that there are kinds of faith that are distinct from belief. And so it could be that even if you're ending up with a kind of skepticism, which means that religious belief is out of the question, could be that there's some alternative way of being related positively to religious propositions. This sort of thing, epistemology or epistemological inquiry could produce, and if it did, then again there'd be a positive impact for religion, at least the sort of religion we might see in the future.